Welcome to Tech Talk Tuesday. Today our talk starts with wholesale high-speed internet regulation. Next, we'll unravel the web of mobile data pricing, then navigating through the Online Harms Act, and finally we'll troubleshoot water-damaged iPhones. Joining us on the line this morning is our local tech expert, Kevin Andrews. Kevin, good morning.
Ben, good morning to you. So
as the CRTC thinks about expanding its rules for wholesale high-speed internet access, big telecom companies like Bell, Rogers, TELUS, they're all worried and suggest changes. Kevin, what are the main issues these companies are worried about, and what do you think might be a good solution?
Well, Ben, for anyone not familiar, last November the CRTC developed a provisional mandate forcing large cable and telephone companies in Ontario and Quebec specifically, Bell and TELUS, to share their fiber-to-home infrastructure with competitors in order to really increase competition. Now, the CRTC chose Ontario and Quebec because competition had really decreased a lot there, and they said, this rule might apply to other provinces too, and really could become permanent. So, it appears that Bell, Rogers, and TELUS are concerned about the prospect of sharing their infrastructure with competitors, not only in Ontario and Quebec, but potentially in other provinces as well, particularly if this arrangement really becomes permanent. So, Bell expressed concerns about how the CRTC's rules might affect its investments, and they say these rules have led to job cuts and what changes if rules are expanded. And TELUS is worried about how these rules might affect rural areas and expensive buried fiber, and they think the rules really should exempt those areas. And then finally, we've got Rogers tuning in here, and they're saying they're worried that too many rules could harm competition and affect their investment. So, they want a balanced approach with fair rates, and they want affordable, affordable prices for everybody. And I think, it's my opinion here, really, the best way to proceed likely is, a balanced approach which really takes into account the concerns of all parties. And really, collaborative efforts might be the only way to really find a solution that really benefits both the businesses and us, the consumers.
And Kevin, in sticking with the telecoms, a May 2023 report found that Canada is the 10th most expensive country in the world for mobile data prices, and there seems to be big discrepancies in pricing across the country, with Saskatchewan coming in as the cheapest. So, Kevin, how does mobile data pricing compare globally, and what are some of the differences in prices here within Canada?
Well, while our prices have indeed dropped over the last 5 years, Canadians, definitely remain aware that we're still paying more than what we might be considered reasonable. And so, considering this, I'm just going to break down the cost per gigabyte of data without really factoring in any of the packages and the plans. And so, if you look across Canada, on the average, Canadians pay about $7.36 per gigabyte of data. Interestingly, our neighbors, the U.S., pay a little more at about $8.22 per gigabyte. And if you look at the very opposite end, the cost skyrockets at places like Zimbabwe, where they pay a staggering $60 per gigabyte. Now, to put things into perspective, consider India, where it's 1.3 billion citizens pay on the average 22 cents per gigabyte. Also in Italy, the average cost, I think, is about 12 cents per gigabyte. So clearly, these places offer much cheaper rates compared to Canada. Now, the telecom companies have argued that Canada's vast geography adds to that cost of delivering the network. And many countries with low population densities comparable to Canada, and if you take Russia, for example, they're coming in at 52 cents per gigabyte, and other places like Mongolia are coming in at 74 cents, ranking them, near one of the cheapest. So, really the question still remains, how has a country with a small population spread over a wide geographic area managed to deliver cell phone services at a fraction of the cost of here in Canada? And, there's no real simple answer here, but in general, a country's data prices are really tied to three main things: the cost of their deployment of the network, competition in the market, and the market tolerance for paying higher prices. Now, competition underscores why Saskatchewan, like you mentioned earlier, stands out with the lower prices here in Canada, largely thanks to SaskTel, which is a local regional provider. And they seem to have effectively really disrupted the dominance of the big three telecom companies. companies. So bottom line here, if you want a fair game, you've got to let the competition in and make sure that they can stick around.
We're speaking with Kevin Andrews, our local techspert on Tech Talk Tuesday here on your VOCM mornings. And Kevin, the Online Harms Act starting to make some noise, set to be introduced in the House of Commons. It aims to hold online platforms accountable for harmful content that they host. It'll require Canadian websites to reduce harm and follow federal law. Kevin, can you just speak a little more about the Online Harms Act and how it will impact online platforms here in Canada?
Yeah, I mean, so this act is considered to be sort of a big step by the Canadian government to deal with harmful content online, and it will make online platforms accountable for what they host and require them to follow federal law to reduce any harm. Ultimately, this is to protect Canadians, especially kids, from internet dangers. Now, as we have seen with the recent hearings in the U.S., where top social media CEOs from X and Meta and TikTok were compelled to testify before Senate, there's a sort of a growing global focus on holding online platforms accountable for their content. And for the most part, social media has been able to really sidestep any sort of formal regulation. So as a result, this trend underscores really an importance of this Online Harms Act in Canada, and it seeks to address similar concerns and ensure really a safer online environment for all users. So there's a definite need for action here sooner rather than later.
And finally, Kevin, when faced with a water-damaged iPhone, many people's first instinct is to place it in a container of rice. I know I have done this numerous times. However, Apple advises against this common remedy and is offering alternative solutions for dealing with water damage. Kevin, what advice does Apple provide for dealing with water-damaged iPhones, and why is rice not recommended?
Ben, who would have known? I mean, I, like yourself and many others, have been doing this for years. I think for me, and it saved my devices, I think. But
absolutely.
Right? Apple has now come out and advised against using rice to dry out damaged iPhones. And they say it can cause more harm than good. And instead, they suggest gently wiping the device with a soft, lint-free cloth to remove any excess water. They also suggest avoid using heat sources like a hot hair dryer or compressed air, as that can damage the phone's internal components. And so they just say after wiping the device, place it in a well-ventilated area to air dry for at least 5 hours before attempting to really turn it on. Now, I mean, between you and me, if my phone takes a dive into the toilet, which, let's be honest, has happened already, and I'm left out to sort of dry, as Apple suggests, I might just be inclined to sort of resort back to the old rice trick and cross my fingers and hope for the best.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely can say that I feel like this rice trick has worked for me numerous times. Kevin, is this just them wanting us to buy more iPhones?
It probably is. I mean, their devices have a lot of complicated circuitry inside, so I can kind of see how something could get damaged. I would say if you put it in a bag of rice, just put it in gently.
Kevin Andrews, our local technologist, we thank you for joining us on another edition of Tech Talk Tuesday.
Ben, appreciate your time. We'll chat again next week.
Absolutely.